Welcome back to another exciting episode on the show, Control or Be Controlled, podcast designed to help you start thinking differently and take control of your life. I remain your host, Darlington. My guest today is Alice Miles. Alice, welcome to Control or Be Controlled.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, what if understanding domestic violence could begin long before someone reaches a crisis point? Our guest today, domestic violence affects people across every community, yet many victims and survivors remain unseen or undeserved. Our guest today is working to change that through education, advocacy, and lived experience. Alice Mike is a survivor, speaker, and advocate dedicated to educating diverse communities about domestic violence, trauma, and prevention. She began her speaking career at a teen dating violence as a teen dating violence spokesperson, recognizing that early education can be one of the most powerful tools for prevention. She has spent 7 years providing direct service to people in unhealthy and safe relationships, helping with safety planning and navigating resources. She also provides trainings and workshops for organizations and businesses to help them better understand and respond to domestic violence. Her advocacy specifically includes undeserved populations such as LGBTQIA+ survivors, male survivors, and military victims and survivors. In 2021, she received the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, recognizing your resiliency media award for our work raising awareness through media and public education. Alice, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Darlington, and for such a warm introduction as well. I'm excited to be here on Control or Be Controlled and diving into some of those more insidious and harder to catch signs of domestic violence and talking about all populations that are impacted by it.
Okay, so Alice, take us back to the beginning. What led you to become a survivor speaker and domestic violence advocate?
Well, like many, my own lived experiences led me to my career and my passions. To start off, when I became a teen dating violence spokesperson, I had been through my own domestic violence and stalking story and experience. Before that, I had grown up in domestic violence. My mother was in traditionally abusive and unhealthy relationships, and I was pretty familiar with the different flavors of abuse and violence and how they show up, not only directly and in confrontation, but also secretly, silently, and in small, subtle behaviors.
All right, so yeah, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say, to dive in a little bit deeper there in terms of my own personal story, I can also share that if you're interested and your audience is seeking to gain some knowledge from lived experiences that might apply to their own stories and experiences.
All right, that'll be wonderful. You can share a story.
Thank you. So, my domestic violence experience, as many would call it, started when I was 19, technically. But it began much earlier than that because of what I shared about my childhood and being so familiar and enmeshed in violence and domestic violence. So, after my mother's third husband had led to her losing custody of me at the age of 8, I was placed with my non-biological father at the time. Following that, he was in an abusive relationship. So I found a different way to live. I left home, and for a while, I was homeless. Wasn't a very long while. I was very lucky and grateful at the time to be moving in with 2 friends that I felt close with. They were older than I was at the time, and they were young adults, whereas I was about 12, 13. And that's really what gives context to my story and opens up into the unique dynamics of domestic violence. Because traditionally, when we hear those words, we envision an intimate relationship between romantic partners. But domestic violence really opens up as an umbrella, referring to the intimate relationship or nature of that relationship, such as mine, where I had been living with my roommates who we had created our own found family in, right? To me, he was my older brother. And when I was 19 and in college, he took advantage of the trust, the years of grooming, of boundary eroding behaviors, sexually assaulted me and stalked me for months to the point where I couldn't sleep without him showing up at my home. I couldn't go to school, go to work, even sit in my own bed without receiving an uncountable amount of messages. You name it, my text messages are going off. My phone is blowing up. I've got a billion missed calls from him. My social media, I've got a bunch of messages there too, right? Anywhere that you could think of contacting me, he's flooding my inboxes. A lot of the times, he was showing up at my home, especially during the times when I had been worn down to exhaustion and finally believing that maybe it was this moment that I could finally sleep, even for just 5 minutes at least. And this persisted for months. Oh, I apologize. Were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. Well, this persisted for months. I had just started my spring semester in college, and it was hard, to say the least. Not only working with the police, reporting my assault, and trying to be as cooperative as possible with the investigation itself, but also trying to survive where he hadn't been immediately arrested, right? Stalking, harassment, sexual assault, these are all things that require a heavy burden of proof and evidence behind. And so for months, while the active investigation was going on, my abuser was showing up at my school, at my work, sending me messages about how deeply he loved me, about how he never wanted to be away from me, and would quickly turn from messages about love and wanting to be together and build a life together to anger and hatred and screaming at me in voice messages, blaming me for what's going wrong, not only in running from the police, but also in the mental health symptoms that he was experiencing. And I still remember when he showed up at my school posting on a live online blog, if you would believe it. I'm going to find you. No matter where you are, no matter how long it takes, I will find you. And spending 5, maybe 6 hours with my school on lockdown in campus police as campus police search trying to find him. And even that's not when our story ends, because from that, he fled to another city, was posting online about wanting to commit suicide, wanting to connect with me, not understanding why I wouldn't respond, not understanding why I went to the police, you name it. And after about 3, maybe 4 days in another city, he, for some reason, decided to go into work, and that's when they arrested him. But that didn't stop what was going on. It just stopped him from showing up at my door. At this point, he had already invaded my life. He had access to all of my social media. He was in my emails. He had seen text messages to my intimate partner at the time. He had everything. And I still had to show up in court and testify and relive and share about the sexual assault experience and about the stalking experiences, about how exhausting it was to have to explain to people why it wasn't safe that he was showing up, and about the paralyzing uncertainty of if I would ever feel safe again, let alone have the ability to sleep.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Alice. So, you began your speaking career focusing on teen dating violence. Why is education and prevention so important?
That is such an important question, and I love that you asked it because the reason early education and intervention is important is because if you look and listen to my story, if I had any helpful, safe adult in my life, if I had awareness or knowledge of coercion, of what abuse was, right? What boundary eroding behaviors were, or even what boundaries were, I might have had an idea of increasing my own sense of safety before it was taken from me. And I say that now in reflection, in hoping that your audience is listening, not in a blaming or victim blaming way, but in a way of recognizing that the more education we put into understanding, respect, boundaries, healthy relationships, the more we really arm ourselves with the tools that we need to have healthy lived experiences, to maintain strong connections with our sense of self. Where often, when we don't have those, we find ourselves in unhealthy relationships, sometimes enmeshment, especially in violence and abuse.
Okay. So, why can it be so difficult for someone experiencing domestic violence to leave the relationship? Most people say people enjoy toxic relationship.
Well, no, that's an interesting question to ask with the observation where people are noticing enjoying a toxic relationship. So, first, I would look at this individual's sense of safety overall when it comes to leaving. Because when you're separating from an unhealthy or an abusive relationship, that's the most dangerous time for you as a victim and survivor. Because that's when everything increases and escalates in terms of threats and the emotional stakes that are at play. But beyond that, often when you're victimized, you've been isolated, right? Your social support system, your friends, your family, the people that you work with, your community. This person has cut you off from them, has blocked you from accessing them in some way, or has created such a fear that they won't believe you that often taking that first step to leave is so terrifying that you don't know what's behind that door. Beyond that, separating when you share a life with somebody, whether it's an intimate partner or you're trying to separate yourself from family abuse, that takes a lot of resources, not only in the resources of the body, the energy, and our nervous system's capacity for change, uncertainty, even lack of predictability, right? But we also need finances. We need the ability to shift into a safe location. And many times that's challenged from being isolated and maybe not having control or access to finances independently. Many times that's going to be limited by shame or, in a lot of relationships, love, the belief that they can change, and the gaslighting and the trauma bonding that reinforces that belief and that hope, limiting you from taking those steps towards safety.
Wonderful, wonderful, Alice. So, how can friends, family members, co-workers, or neighbors recognize that someone may be experiencing abuse without putting that person at greater risk?
Absolutely. And that's going to be such a broad and yet unique answer as well, right? Because abuse comes in many flavors, and recognizing signs of it can be really challenging. Sometimes it's obvious and direct in bruises, unexplained injuries, and a heightened startle response, right? You might notice somebody gets tense or even flinches when a particular person around them moves, or anybody does. But when you're experiencing emotional abuse or financial abuse, for example, you're going to be looking for signs that this person doesn't have access to respect, that no doesn't work for them. So this might look like, let's say, in the emotional abuse or the psychological abuse, this person might be connected to somebody who consistently belittles or humiliates them, tears them down and leads them to feel badly about themselves. Maybe they just highlight and poke at all the insecurities this person has. But you'll notice that this person doesn't feel safe around them. Their body language will shift. They're going to become smaller. They're going to be quieter. No might not even come out of their mouth. It might not even feel like something that's safe for them to say. Or they might not even be aware that they're allowed to say that in these areas of life. Financial abuse, that might look like somebody having to ask permission for any use of money in a relationship, or somebody else having control over their money and they don't have independent control of that money. And it can look like a lot more too, depending on what that person is experiencing and, let's say, the profile of the abuser as well. That can go into gaslighting, that can go into coercion, and it can especially show up in what's called sly behaviors and stalking and harassment, right? This is where somebody is surveilled consistently. This is somebody whose life has been intruded on, meaning that the person who is abusing them or harming them is everywhere in their life. They're in every single friendship circle. They know their family members. Maybe they work together. They might even be a pillar of the community connected to them in a volunteer service position. Beyond that, you're going to be looking for interference and intimidation. Somebody who is threatening or even just implying that harm could happen if the desired thing that they want to happen doesn't. Interference, well, we're a lot more familiar with that in terms of the assault that can happen, property destruction, even the hostility of harming somebody's reputation in their community or in their relationships with their friends and their family members.
All right. Thank you so much. I really hope my audience can take from this and find how to provide support, know when someone is experiencing abuse. So, what are some things people commonly say to survivors that may be well-intentioned but actually cause them harm?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I like to think of that as a bingo response, right? Something that when you're vulnerable or you're reaching out for help, you could fill out on a bingo card in how you were dismissed, invalidated, blamed, or led to believe that it was your fault. So we're all well-intentioned, and sometimes we don't know how the words that we say is going to land with somebody, right? But if you find yourself asking somebody what they did to lead to somebody else's extreme or explosive response, you might be contributing to victim blaming and shaming them for how they showed up in that moment. It may come across as curiosity or you're trying to understand the situation, but the more that you look into the actions, right, trying to understand the why of it all, well, the further you're pushing that person away.
Okay, wonderful. So we will need to have emotional intelligence to be able to do this.
Absolutely. Emotional intelligence is incredibly valuable when you're supporting somebody who's leaving or experiencing abuse, or you're interacting with a survivor. Often in our well-intentioned spaces as well, we tend to try to offer more than we can give. And it can lead to mixed messages and uncertainty that can really create some distance between you and the person that you're seeking to support. Even, and this is where I caution the listener, when you hear this, try not to blame yourself, right? But a lot of the time when somebody is sharing that they're experiencing abuse, we have an automatic reaction. It's really hard to slow that down and stop it in the moment. But you might hear somebody react in confusion or shock, right? I've never had that experience with this person, or I'm so shocked. they've never shown this before, right? But in just that moment, that reaction, you don't realize that you're taking that person's voice away because you're also experiencing grooming and gaslighting, manipulation and coercion, and acting as what we may call a flying monkey, reinforcing those dynamics and especially those dynamics of abuse in the moment, reacting with that shock and that disbelief that this abuse couldn't have happened because you haven't witnessed it or experienced it yourself.
Okay, so for someone listening right now who may recognize themselves in this conversation but isn't ready to seek help, what would you want them to know?
What I would want them to know is that when they are ready and they're seeking that help, the advocates are ready for you. So I would encourage calling the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 719-799-7233. When you speak with them, everything that you share is going to be confidential. They're going to be supportive. They're going to listen to you and your experience with warmth and care and compassion. And their biggest mission is to get you closer to safety. So I would encourage, as hard as it is, try to open up and be a little bit vulnerable and ask for the things that your body has learned aren't safe for you to need. Ask for the resources for a domestic violence shelter. Ask if there's a financial grant that can help you with moving into emergency housing. And for those who are listening who may be experiencing homelessness or are at risk of losing housing because they're seeking safety, I would encourage connecting to your city and finding the housing information system and completing what we call a vulnerability index, or VI-SPDAT for short. What that does is that puts you on the board for case managers who are working in housing support systems. They know that you need housing, and they are working for opportunities for you to get connected, whether it's through emergency housing, transitional housing, a shelter. They can connect you to more resources than you're aware that you can ask for.
Okay, so what is one thing you wish every person understood about domestic violence and survivors?
Oh, man, that is such a loaded question because I could respond with so many different answers. And I think one of the biggest things that I would repeat to anybody about domestic violence is that when you're experiencing it, when you're struggling to leave it, and people are asking those questions of, why can't you just leave? I want you to know this isn't a reflection of strength. This isn't a reflection of intelligence. This isn't a reflection of you not being worthy of love and safety and respect. This is a reflection of your nervous system and how it's learned and adapted to keep you safe as possible, especially while you're experiencing abuse. So when shame crops up and you're navigating the darkness and you feel like you're alone and you don't know where your voice is, I want you to listen and remind yourself that that echo is false. You are strong enough, but your nervous system has a limited capacity for threat and for how much it can hold at one time. So when you're tired, when you're scared, when you're worn down, please know that's your body working really hard to keep you safe, to keep you here. And it means that you are that much closer to getting your safety and having your voice heard.
Okay, Alice, thank you so much. So, before you go, is there a question you wish I would have asked you that I have not asked you? Maybe something you would like to share with my audience?
Yeah, I would have loved a question around boundaries, right? How we learn to have them and how we learn to take them away. And especially getting deeper into understanding what coercion looks like, what it sounds like, and how people are impacted in different populations. For example, the male community. They are particularly under-resourced in navigating domestic violence, especially in an area of, let's say, lacking safety that's so vital and few talk about.
Okay, wonderful, Alice. Thank you for sharing your lived experience, professional perspective, and advocacy work with us. Today's conversation reminds us that domestic violence is not limited to one type of person, relationship, or community, and that awareness, education, and early intervention can make a meaningful difference. Most importantly, survivors deserve to be believed, supported, and given access to safety without judgment. So if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, consider reaching out to a qualified local domestic violence service or crisis organization for confidential support and safety planning. Alice, for people who might like to reach out to you and know more about what you do, how can they do that?
For anyone who's listening and looking to connect and reach out more, you can reach me at coffeetalkllc.com or coffeetalkllc@outlook.com. It's my website and my email, and I'm open to those who are seeking to learn more about domestic violence, the dynamics, and especially how to support survivors in navigating them and increasing access to resources.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank to all my audience as well. Thank you for listening to this episode of Control or Be Controlled. This conversation helped you understand domestic violence, trauma, or survival advocacy differently. Share this episode with someone who may need to benefit from this. Until next time, stay informed, stay compassionate, and take control of your life before life takes control of you. Thank you, Alice, for coming to my show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to hearing more of your episodes come out in the future.
Okay, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day ahead.
You as well.
Bye, guys. I will see you guys on the next episode.